Hello everybody, welcome to this meeting of Gedling Borough Council Cabinet, Thursday 16th of June at 2 o'clock. Now I'm going to open the formal business of the meeting. The first item on our agenda today is apologies for absence. We've got apologies from the leader of the council who's on other council business, so as Deputy Leader and Vice Chair of Cabinet I'll be chairing today's committee. Are there any other apologies? No, none received. Okay, thank you. Item 2 then is to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of March 2022. Any comments or questions in relation to the minutes? People happy to approve them as a correct record? They're agreed. Thank you very much. Item 3 is declarations of interest for officers and members. Anybody got any declarations of interest that they want to indicate at this point? I'm not seeing any indications. Item 4 then is the forward plan, which is on page 19 to 17 of the agenda pack. Unless Emma's got anything that she wants to add, are there any comments or questions people want to raise in terms of the forward plan, which is here to note? No, I'm not seeing any indications. Okay, first substantive item on the agenda then is item 5, houses in multiple occupancy, HMOs in the Netherfield ward, pages 19 to 35 of the agenda. And I think Mike Avery is going to introduce his report for us. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. The report is to inform members of the suitability of implementing an Article 4 direction to introduce a requirement for planning permission to change from a family dwelling to a house in multiple occupation comprising 3 to 6 unrelated people who share facilities in the Netherfield ward. This is in accordance with the resolution made by full council on the 20th of April. Permitted development rights are a national grant of planning permission which allows certain building works and change of use to be carried out without having to make a planning application. An Article 4 direction is a direction made under Article 4 of the Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development England Order 2015, which enables the Secretary of State or the local planning authority to withdraw specific permitted development rights across a defined area. The National Planning Policy Framework advises that the use of Article 4 directions to remove national permitted development rights should be limited to situations where an Article 4 direction is necessary to protect local amenity or the well-being of the area, and in all cases, be based on robust evidence and applied to the smallest geographical area possible. More detailed information on the background and use of Article 4 directions is provided at Appendix 1 of the report. Appendix 1 also includes a detailed analysis of the suitability of implementing an Article 4 direction and considers the following current evidence available. Firstly, an assessment of planning applications proposing 7-bedroom HMOs at 56 Meadow Road, 45 Ashwell Street and 112 Victoria Road. These applications have been determined to be compliant with the MPPF, Greater Nottingham Aligned Core Strategy, local planning document, and the car parking provision for residential developments supplementary planning document. Secondly, concerns raised at a residents' meeting held on the 3rd of March 2022 at the St George's Church, Victoria Road, Netherfield. None of the concerns, either singularly or in combination, would merit suitable justification to progress an Article 4 direction. Thirdly, a written submission by Tom Randall MP, received by the leader of Gedling Borough Council on the 20th of April 2022, detailing the results of a survey undertaken by the MP and a county councillor. The data indicates that the respondents have concerns about HMOs, and whilst these may be valid concerns, this does not demonstrate that an Article 4 direction is justified. Fourthly, an analysis of applications made by landlords for HMO licences under the Housing Act 2004. In Netherfield, there's been one licence granted at 1A Meadow Road. The council has received HMO licences for applications for 6 further properties, which are still being processed. The precise number of smaller HMOs accommodating 3 or 4 unrelated individuals sharing is unknown, but it's understood to be low. Further to the publication of the report, a member of the public has raised concern that the Council is unable to confirm the precise number. They've been advised that selective licensing has been in place in Netherfield since the 1st of October 2018 and applies to all rented homes other than those which are 5 occupants or above and are subject to mandatory HIMO licensing. Currently, the Council does not specifically record on its database properties which have a selective licence and have been used as a HIMO. In response to this concern, and to ensure effective monitoring, we will shortly be introducing a way of monitoring HIMOs identified in Netherfield via the selective licensing scheme. Finally, observations from the Community Protection Manager are considered. Their comments confirm that antisocial behaviour levels reported to the Council in respect of known HIMOs in Netherfield is low. There are 2,915 residential properties within the ward of Netherfield. An assessment of the composition of the housing stock in Netherfield concludes that only 0.24% is comprised of HIMOs accommodating 5 or more unrelated individuals, and this could rise to 0.27% should a further pending planning application be granted. The overall conclusions of the assessment, having regard to the requirements set out in the National Planning Policy Framework and the Planning Practice Guidance, is that there is currently insufficient evidence to demonstrate that an Article 4 direction is necessary to protect local amenity or the well-being of the Netherfield ward. The situation should, however, be monitored to ensure that the proliferation of HIMOs does not emerge in any particular locality of the Netherfield ward as a whole, which might then justify that consideration of an article direction is required. In accordance with the report, it's recommended that Cabinet firstly agree that there's currently insufficient evidence to demonstrate that an Article 4 direction is necessary to protect the local amenity or well-being of the Netherfield ward, and secondly, agree that the overall number of HIMOs in the Netherfield ward should be monitored. Thank you, Deputy Leader.
Thank you very much, Mike, for that comprehensive walkthrough report. And let me just start by saying thank you to you personally for the incredibly, as ever, diligent job you've done of the report, which obviously flows out of the expectation that was set by full council in the motion that you referred to. And I think you've helpfully and ably walked us through all of the issues, both in the report and the appendix, which is before us as Cabinet. Let me just start by saying that I think everybody in this room knows, and I think everybody in Netherfield knows, that it's deeply frustrating that in October 2010, the coalition government took a decision, I think, wrong-headedly, to remove a requirement for planning permission for a change of use from an ordinary dwelling house, C3 use, to C4 HMO. And I think it's worth saying before we even start a debate about this report here today that perhaps none of us would be here today debating this issue about the potential proliferation of HMOs without input from the community if the coalition government in October 2010 hadn't taken the decision to rescind the legislation was in place ordinarily. That legislation required planning permission for such a change of use, and it was removed. And I think it was a misstep by the government back in 2010. I think it remains a misstep. Council made its views very clear about that, and I hope that government will take that on board. I just wanted to say on behalf of the entire council, really, thank you to the residents in Netherfield for sharing their views and concerns. I know, Mike, there was a council meeting on the 3rd of March, so councillors weren't able to attend the public meeting that was organised by residents in Netherfield, but you did attend on behalf of the leader of the council and the whole council to listen to the concerns, and they're expressed here today in the report from residents in Netherfield. And I wanted to put on record my thanks for you to attending the meeting, but also specifically to residents in Netherfield who have shared their concerns, which aren't just, I think, about the need for planning permission for a change in use to HMOs, but are also about other issues, on-street parking, associated issues around antisocial behaviour, issues around fly tipping and littering, not all of which are directly connected to HMOs, but all of which do affect the well-being of a community. And I want to say very, very clearly, on behalf of the Leader of the Council and this Council takes those issues seriously. And where there are concerns expressed by the residents in Netherfield and communities in Netherfield about those issues, even if they don't directly relate to HMOs, they should report them to their local councillors or directly into the council, and we will absolutely take action, because we know that these sorts of issues affect people's communities. The report is, I think, as you have set out to us here today, Mike, I want to thank John Clark and Barbara Miller, who are the two local borough councillors, who I think have taken on board what has been said by the local community, but also what's been said by officers in the way that we deal with this issue. And I want to move from the chair an amended set of recommendations in my name on behalf of the Leader of Council as Deputy Leader of the Council, which will be seconded by the Cabinet member responsible for this area, Councillor Jenny Hollingsworth, which is to replace the two current recommendations which are in the report, which I will read out. The current recommendations state that Cabinet agree that there is currently insufficient evidence to demonstrate that an Article 4 direction is necessary to protect local amenity or the well-being of the Netherfield ward, and secondly, that Cabinet agrees that the overall number of HMOs in the Netherfield ward should be monitored. So I'm going to move an alternative replacement set of recommendations in my name as Deputy Leader on behalf of the Leader of the Council in his absence, seconded by Councillor Hollingsworth, and those new recommendations will read that Cabinet 1 shares residents' concerns about a potential increase in the number of HMOs in the Netherfield ward, notes actions already taken by this council to implement HMO licensing across the borough and introduce selective licensing in Netherfield in October 2018. Secondly, that Cabinet endorses the Leader of the Council writing to the Government calling for a reversal of legislation introduced in October 2010, which removed the requirement for planning permission for HMOs and opened up the risk, which we've heard about today, of proliferation of HMOs without adequate input from local communities. And thirdly, that Cabinet requests officers to report back to Cabinet within 6 months, earlier if possible, but within 6 months, with a further update to allow Cabinet to then further consider and determine if there is sufficient evidence to demonstrate an Article 4 direction and or other measures necessary to protect local amenity or the well-being of the Netherfield ward. I think we all know, we've just seen in recent weeks as a council that there are new applications for a licence for HMO coming forward. There may well be new applications in terms of planning that come forward in relation to HMOs, and also welcome what you've said, Mike, about the need for the council to set in train forward monitoring of the number of HMOs. What, in essence, the Cabinet is saying today is that we are acutely aware of concerns by local residents, although at the moment the current evidence which is laid out in the report may not meet the threshold required for an Article 4. This Cabinet is not going to close down the route to an Article 4. It's going to keep the situation under close monitor, and it's going to expect a report to come back here within 6 months. And if there is then insufficient evidence for an Article 4, either immediate or non-immediate Article 4 direction to be implemented, this Cabinet will not hesitate in taking a decision to implement it, but that decision will be taken at that time. So I will formally move the recommendations, and I'll ask Councillor Hollingsworth to second the recommendations.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Leader. I absolutely endorse everything you said and second this amended set of recommendations. It is hugely frustrating that we work with one hand tied behind our back in terms of a certain set of HMOs which the government removed from planning obligations in 2010. It's good to hear from the officer that a system is being introduced to monitor HMOs under the selective licensing, which answers a question that was raised by a member of the community, which again in that 6 months period should give us some further information to decide on whether an Article 4 is actually necessary. We do need that robust evidence. If we don't have robust evidence and just introduce an Article 4 without it, we do risk it being overturned by the Secretary of State or challenged by developers, which is a hugely expensive undertaking to defend the introduction of that Article 4. So absolutely agree that another 6 months of monitoring, evidence gathering, so we can make a proper determination, which will pass the government's threshold of robust, as they clearly indicate, robust evidence to support the introduction of an Article 4. So I second. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hollingsworth, and I think you're quite right. Page 25 of the report also outlines that it's not just the Cabinet that is concerned and is going to listen to Netherfield residents about this. Our own planning committee has. There have, over the last 5 years, been 3 determined applications for planning permission in Netherfield. That's 3 determined applications for planning permission in Netherfield to change the use of a property from a dwelling to a HMO, proposing the occupation of the property by more than 6 unrelated people. Of those 3 applications that have been heard in the last 5 years, 2 against officer advice have been turned down by our planning committee, one of which then, after the proposal was refused, contrary to officer recommendation, a revised scheme was subsequently implemented under permitted development, comprising 6 bedrooms. That's permitted development that was granted by the change that the government made, not by this council. The second application, which was turned down by our planning committee against officer advice, was then overturned by the government's, not this council's, the government's planning inspector. So anybody who says that this council doesn't take these issues seriously is on a fool's errand. And the third one was then permitted approval for under-delegated authority. So I think the facts bear out that this council is taking this matter seriously, and I think the recommendations that are moved today in the Cabinet's name show that this council will continue to take this issue seriously. And if an evidence threshold, and the threshold is set by the government, is met for an Article 4 direction, this Cabinet will not hesitate in taking the action necessary to implement one at the time that that evidence threshold is met. I'll introduce Councillor David Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. Can I echo the thanks to Mike Avery for a typically thorough report within planning law, and I think, as Councillor Hollingsworth said, shows how much of this we're dealing with one hand tied behind our backs. I think we all recognise that residents are concerned about the increase in HMOs in Netherfield, concerned about the effect on neighbourhoods and risk of ASB and effect on the community generally. I went back to the February 21 Planning Committee. It's quite helpful during lockdown. Everything's now on YouTube. And we had those 2 difficult decisions, 2 difficult HMO proposals. And if you watch the debate, members were agonising with trying to square the circle of concerns with what we're allowed to do under planning law. And as you say, we went against the officer recommendation to turn 2 of them down. In fact, they were referred to planning committee by the delegated panel to give them that sort of airing. So I think fairly clearly we all share concerns. I would like to particularly draw attention to the other side of the issue that's raised in the paper, particularly section 7, which talks about other means. I think planning is a very difficult, very blunt tool to use for most of this. Whereas on the other side, the registration. So as a council, we are registering HMOs for more than 5 residents with under that legislation, and we introduced selective licensing for all of Netherfield. So all private rented accommodation in Netherfield is registered through the selective licensing scheme. And both schemes they introduce conditions around the safety of the premises, and gas safety, electrical safety, fire, smoke alarms, and require licence holders to be fit and proper people to keep the area maintained inside and outside, to make sure refuse is dealt with appropriately, and that tenants have their agreements. So I think we've been proactive in registering and monitoring the behaviour of landlords and tenants in all private rented accommodation in Netherfield and HMOs across the borough. and I think that's something we certainly need to continue doing. But I'm happy that at this point the evidence isn't given for an Article 4 direction, but that we need to keep monitoring it with the two sides, the planning side and the management and licensing side. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Couldn't agree more. So I'll move the recommendations. Let me just also say for the record, anybody who does think this council should be implementing an Article 4 direction immediately, it's incumbent on them to come forward and present the evidence that this government says that is required, because let me just say to those people calling for an immediate introduction of the Article 4 direction without producing sufficient evidence, you're playing fast and loose with taxpayers' money, and you're playing fast and loose with taxpayers' money at a time when this council can't afford to be playing fast and loose with council taxpayers' money, because if you introduce an Article 4 direction without there being sufficient evidence on the government's threshold, you are liable to compensation claims legally. So anybody out there publicly calling for an Article 4 direction for this council to immediately implement one, I'm calling on you here publicly, please produce your evidence, please produce that sufficient evidence, and if you can produce that sufficient evidence, the council will take necessary action. If you can't, I think it's disingenuous on you to be misleading the public and calling on them to that you think the council should implement an Article 4 direction at this stage. So I'll move the amended recommendations as have been read out, as have been seconded by Councillor Hollingsworth. All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? Those amended recommendations are unanimously carried, and thank you again, Mike, for your very thorough report to Cabinet and to Cabinet colleagues for contributing to the debate. Item 6 then on the agenda is decision of the Ombudsman following a complaint against the Council, which is on page 37 to page 45. And this is going to be introduced, I think, by the Monitoring Officer. Fran?
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware that at the Council we operate a two-stage complaints process where individuals can complain about the service of the Council. If they're not happy with the outcome of the response at stage 2, they have the option to make a complaint to the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman. The Ombudsman will then determine whether an investigation is necessary, and if an investigation is completed and the Ombudsman find that the Council has been guilty of maladministration causing an injustice, that triggers a requirement under the Section 5A of the Local Government and Housing Act 1989 for the Monitoring Officer to prepare a report to the Executive. This report has also been circulated to all members in accordance with the legislation. The Ombudsman has made a finding of maladministration causing injustice in relation to this particular complaint. The full details of the complaint and the Ombudsman decision are appended to the report, but the complaint relates to repeated non-collection of garden waste bins from a particular resident throughout 2020 and 2021. The initial complaint came in July 2020 after a couple of missed collections. The Council apologised for that and explained that that was a time when the COVID-19 pandemic was having an impact on service provision. Sometime later in September 2021, a second stage complaint came through from the same resident saying again there had been repeated miscollections in relation to the garden waste scheme. Again, the Council issued an apology, explained that it was at fault in relation to those miscollections, that it would speak to waste crews in relation to this matter. Further miscollections following that second stage complaint in October led to this particular resident taking the matter to the Ombudsman. In relation to the findings and in relation to the investigation, the Council quickly offered compensation to the resident for the 2 years service that were missed over 2020 and 2021. The Ombudsman then recommended through the course of the investigation that further compensation was paid to that resident. In particular, the Ombudsman was concerned with the onus that was put on the resident to continually keep contacting the Council to let them know that their collection had been missed and the inconvenience that that particular resident was put through, having to do that on numerous occasions. The compensation was paid to the resident as recommended by the Ombudsman prior to the final decision being issued in the investigation. There were no further recommendations or actions from the Ombudsman in relation to this particular complaint. However, it should also be noted that there is currently a review of waste management software systems underway and administrative processes associated with that, in a hope that a new waste management system will improve the process of reporting misbin by crews by improving the in-cab devices that are out on the rounds. This should reduce the need for customers to self-report misbin collections, or they will be flagged up immediately on the system and the bin collected. Also, there is a review of the waste service complaints management process underway in an attempt to identify what is the real source of these issues and is there common themes through these complaints that can be addressed through the service. In light of the Ombudsman findings and the duty that triggers on me as monitoring officer, the recommendations in relation to this are on page 37. So the first is that the decision at Appendix 1 from the Ombudsman be noted by members. Secondly, it's noted that a copy of this report has been circulated to all members of the Council. And the third is that a report be prepared on behalf of the Executive setting out the action to be taken and reasons for it being prepared. Now, in relation to that, it's set out in the report the actions that are currently being taken by the service and the actions specifically taken in relation to this complainant. If there are any further actions that Cabinet feel are appropriate, then they will be discussed today and then taken forward in a report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Monitoring Officer. Eugene?
Thank you, Deputy Leader. So, as the officer ultimately responsible for the service, I'd like to again apologise to this customer for the issues that we caused over 2020 and 2021. And we have accepted that we could have done things better. While staff were working during the pandemic, there were challenging circumstances. However, on this occasion, we simply did not meet the standards of ourselves and that of our customers expect of us. So as Fran has highlighted and what's detailed in the report, we are taking proactive steps to address how we deal with misbin complaints and how to prevent that from happening in the future. One of the key elements of that is introducing a new waste management system, which we're in the process of procuring. This should give us much better technology, both in-cab for our operatives and also integration into customer services, so that we can better inform customers about miscollections or when their collections will take place. Also on the agenda for this afternoon is the adoption of the new waste policy, which will help clarify both for staff and for customers around the expectations required in terms of our waste services and garden waste. But I'm happy to take any further questions.
Thank you very much, Eugene. And I'd just like to reiterate the point that's been made, I think, both in the decision of the Ombudsman and also articulated by the Corporate Director, an apology to the customer concerned. We made a mistake. It was a shortcoming. It's quite right that we apologise. It's quite right that the individual has been compensated, and it's quite right that we're taking rigorous and robust actions to make sure that wherever possible we try and eradicate such mistakes. Obviously, particularly at this time of year, it's really important. People are out and about in their gardens. The weather's been really nice recently, and people need this service and use this service. It is a popular service. Our staff do an outstanding job, I think, under extreme pressure, and we've seen that recently over COVID. They're very well respected, our refuse collectors, and we should say thank you to them. But occasionally we do make mistakes. No organisation, no individual, no team is perfect. And where we do make mistakes, it's right that we put our hand up and apologise, and that we do everything we can within our power to rectify them and to improve service. And that relies on people's feedback. And on this occasion, we fell short. So to the individual, I'd just like to echo apologies on behalf of the Council. Would anybody else like to add anything further? Councillor McCrossan?
Just to concur with everything that's been said in terms of, obviously, an apology to the particular resident in question, but I think the most important thing is the fact that as a council we have aspirations to improve the services that we have across the board, and all good organisations move forward. Whatever the report might be, we accept that we're at fault, but that we move forward, and systems, we're going to look at mechanisms and systems in place to make sure that we do the best we possibly can, and if there is a complaint, we meet that complaint and move forward and hopefully provide a better service for all concerned. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCrossan. So I'll move the recommendations in the report, seconded by Councillor McCrossan. Everybody happy to agree with the recommendations? Anybody against? Any abstentions? Those recommendations are carried unanimously. Thank you to Monitoring Officer and to Corporate Director Eugene. Item 7 then on our agenda is the Waste and Recycling Policy. I think this is going to be introduced by Mel.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to recommend adoption of the waste and recycling policy, which includes the Nottinghamshire principles for the reduction of contamination following public consultation. It's a key decision because it will have impact on communities living and working in the area, comprising of 2 or more wards. Gedling Borough Council have revised their waste policy in order to progress the stated ambitions of the council, to formalise the approach and to address areas of underperformance in relation to recycling rates and levels of recycling contamination. The policy also serves to support the council's carbon management strategy. An associated waste and recycling strategy is also being developed to set out the approach of the council in terms of how the policy will be delivered for residents, organisations and businesses in Gedling Borough within the national, regional and local contexts, both through and with partners. As good practice, the council held a public consultation between the 4th of February and the 4th of March of this year to ascertain residents' views on the policy. 33 responses were received via the website and email. These are summarised in the consultation review in Appendix B and have been incorporated into the policy. The comments made have not resulted in any overall material change to the policy. Many comments, though directed via the waste policy, were more pertinent to the delivery of the carbon management strategy that this policy supports and will be picked up in the delivery of that action plan and strategy moving forward. The proposal is that the Cabinet adopt the waste and recycling policy, which includes the Nottinghamshire principles for the reduction of contamination, notes the equalities impact assessment and notes the summary and analysis of the consultation. Members could determine not to adopt the policy, but this isn't a recommended route, as support is required to improve performance county-wide, and also clarity for householders is intended to support this. Following approval, a review of resources will take place, which may require further budget approvals and the establishment of a modest budget to support the implementation of the policy following its adoption. The Environment Protection Act 1990 and regulations made thereunder deal with the protection of the environment and specific responsibilities relating to litter and waste. The Act places a legal duty on local authorities to collect controlled waste and to recycle, and it also provides the power to specify how waste should be presented for collection and how failure to comply with requirement can be enforced. The Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014 also provides enforcement powers to local authorities to enable community protection warnings and notices to be issued to prevent conduct such as obstructive vehicles which impact on the quality of life for those in the locality. The view is that the equalities impact assessment is required for this policy. In terms of disability, the service offers a range of assistance in terms of householder responsibility for waste disposal, which ranges from assisted pull-outs to options to receive communication materials in a range of formats and to ensure services are inclusive. The clarity of information supports the ability of staff teams to apply the elements of the policy consistently to all members of the community at all times. The waste and recycling policy also supports the efficient collection of waste and supports the carbon reduction agenda through the minimisation of journeys by fleet. It supports environmental sustainability through stated aims of increasing recycling levels and reducing contamination in recycling across the borough. It also supports environmental sustainability through the stated aim of reducing levels of residual waste per household and delivers to the council's approved carbon management policy and action plan in this way. So the reasons for recommendation are based on performance improvement requirements in waste service identified in the regular performance reports that are handed to councillors and portfolio holders. So in summary, the recommendation is that Cabinet adopts the waste and recycling policy, which includes the Nottinghamshire principles for the reduction of contamination, notes the summary analysis of the consultation, and also notes the equality impact assessment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mel. Thank you for your work on this and also the responses we received in terms of the consultation. Any comments people want to make from Cabinet members on this? Councillor McCross.
Just a brief one. Thanks again for Mel for his work on this area. Obviously, this policy is really emphasises the two-way process. It's not just about Gedling putting into practice all the key things that need to happen in the next few years because of the pressures we are now under to recycle and the climate change we now find ourselves in. But also there's an emphasis on residents to take responsibility for their waste and recycling. And I fully support this policy. I think it's a policy for the future and one that all the Cabinet members, I'm sure, will support. And again, thanks very much for the hard work that's gone into this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor McCrossan. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. When this draft came to us first time before consultation, we gave it a good talking through, so I don't need to spend a lot of time on this. But I'd like to thank Mel as well and just say that we agree the aims that are set out in the document, and I think it's a clear and comprehensive policy statement that reads easily, and people who say they don't know what's recycling, can look at the policy, and it's there. I thought it was interesting the results of the consultation. I think most people seem to be saying they want more recycling and greater clarity about what can be recycled. Very much the discussion we had in Cabinet when it first came. I thought the other interesting comment was the reaction to smaller bins in the light of the mischief that was made during the recent by-elections, trying to scare people into thinking they were going to be forced to have smaller bins. It's interesting how many people came and said they actually wanted smaller bins. So it just shows how complicated this whole area is and how it needs judgment. But I'm happy to support the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Anybody else? So the recommendations are that we adopt the waste and recycling policy, which includes the Nottinghamshire principles for the reduction of contamination following public consultation, which are attached in Appendix A. Secondly, that we note the summary analysis of the consultation, which are attached in Appendix B. And thirdly, we note the equalities impact assessment accompanying the policy document, which are attached in Appendix C. So I'll move the recommendations, seconded by Councillor McCrossan. Everybody happy to agree? Those in favour, yeah. Anybody against? No. Any abstentions? That's agreed unanimously. And the final item on our agenda is any other items the Chair considers urgent. I have none, and none have been notified to me, so I'll formally close the meeting. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.